Let's continue this discussion. We stay on the issue of load shedding. We continue to experience rolling blackouts. The impact on the economy may be felt for years to come. Mohammed Mahdi is an energy analyst and he joins us now live. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Mahdi. We do appreciate it. I think perhaps I can ask you the question. I'm not sure if you heard that ANC story, but we do know that the NEC is currently meeting at this stage. Who do you think should be responsible and accountable for the current mess at Eskom?
That's obviously a very complicated question. So good evening, first of all, to you and all the viewers. Look, I think, looking backwards is not going to help us. Clearly, we have an issue with regard to the leadership of Eskom in the sense that not all parties are comfortable. What we need to understand is we are in an emergency situation with regard to the electricity supply, and we need to start acting as such. So government needs to start acting as such. Stop asking backward-looking questions and stop asking things that are actually irrelevant right now. Let's understand what actually needs to be done to help sort this situation out. I think leadership is key. And even though I've said before, the leaders of Eskom are merely pawns in the overall picture with regard to electricity supply in this country, electricity generation in this country, we need to acknowledge that they do play a role in getting certain stakeholders on board. Right now, we have a leadership that is not accepted by all and that was not actually, appointed in a very transparent process. So I would think what needs to be done is we need to get leadership in at Eskom that is appointed through some sort of public hearing process or more inclusive process that needs to include the voices of the users of electricity, needs to include the voices of unions, we can't ignore that, and also needs to involve the voices of many political parties and opposition parties, not just the ruling party. And when we have that, and when we have an appointment made following an inclusive process, then we get rid of all the noise in terms of, whether this leadership is the right leadership or not. We agree that this is the leadership as a country, and then we move forward. So that's the first thing we need to do. The second thing that we really need to do is understand what government should be doing. Instead of trying to, sort of play the blame game right now and scapegoat a few people, let's look at the policy. Let's look at those things that will unlock the energy bottlenecks that we have in this country. One of the most important in this regard is the legislation and the regulation of the industry. So we need to increase the liberalization of this industry at a much, much higher rate than it has been, up to now. Credit has to be given. We have liberalized quite a bit. I mean, compared to a few years ago, we now have, up to 100 megawatts of electricity that can be generated for own use, etc. But there are certain very key aspects of the electricity supply industry that need to be overhauled, and those need to be liberalized very quickly. The effect of that is it will unlock a lot of private sector involvement, private sector investment, and unlock the ability for many users to develop their own power. We can't get away from this. We must allow the end users to have choice.
This is having a massive impact on everybody. Every aspect of our lives is impacted in some way. If it's not hospitals, it's traffic. If it's not traffic, it's crime. But most importantly, I think it's really impacting the economy. And I'm curious to know what you think the alternatives are for businesses that are struggling, for businesses that don't have the means to buy a generator and keep it running for hours on end. Do these businesses move over to solar? We have the sun in this country. I don't know why we're not using it. Somebody once said to me, the reason why we don't capitalize on the sun in this country is because you can't steal sun. So it will be very difficult for them to be corrupt in that aspect. But anyway, I'm diverting now. But what do you think the solutions are for businesses to operate in this devastating situation that we're in because of these rolling blackouts?
So I think, look, let's first, I think we as a public also need to get rid of the cynicism that exists, and sometimes justifiably so. The cynicism exists, but we need to get rid of that and really start focusing on solutions, and everyone plays a role in this. Now, for businesses, to find alternatives, immediately there aren't a hell of a lot of alternatives. You can switch to solar. Solar is being adopted at a massive rate in the private sector in this country. We know, being involved in this industry for a long time, we know the rate at which solar is being adopted by businesses and by the private sector. And we know that solar panels, for example, are selling at the highest rate they've ever sold in this country. The issue, as is often pointed out, is that solar is not base load power, so it doesn't provide power 24/7. However, solar, together with other forms of energy generation, do provide an alternative to Eskom. And that, unfortunately, is being ignored by those that keep chanting the same mantra that solar does not provide baseload power. It's true it doesn't. But, when combined with certain other forms of generation, gas, for example, there's many parts of this country, industrial parts, I should say, where there is gas available or where gas can be made available. So solar gas hybrid plants are definitely possible. Storage, in some cases, where you have a business continuity imperative. And storage, although it's more expensive, is certainly cheaper than letting your business not run. So there are alternatives. So these are the alternatives. Now, what happens in the case of a business that cannot afford this? I think this is, again, where government has to come to the party. We have to have incentives in place or some kind of tax kickbacks, subsidies. Those kinds of things have to be put in place to help business. Since 2018 to 2017, we haven't had a lot of incentives in this country, in fact, even before that. Whereas if you look at most of the countries that have adopted renewable energy, there have been a period where there's been government support and government incentives. Now, today, renewable energy is actually cheaper than Eskom-based power. However, for companies that can't afford it, we need to have some kind of support structure, support system in place. This is imperative. And this is something government cannot ignore.
Just lastly, Mr. Madi, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and people might think, why would I ask such a question? But I think it's a relevant one. Somebody asked me this one day, and it took me a while to, come to a conclusion, and I want to hear your views. Do you think anybody is benefiting from these rolling blackouts? Do you think someone out there wants blackouts in this country?
So I think from a technical and an engineering perspective, it's very understandable that the rolling blackouts are happening. We have an aging fleet, and we have a maintenance schedule that is not always adhered to, or sometimes where the budget doesn't always exist, or there isn't, in some cases, there isn't a will for this to happen. But to look at, dark forces or unknown forces or other forces benefiting from the rolling blackouts, I think there are definitely going to be people that benefit anyway, but I don't think that they are the cause of the rolling blackouts. The cause of the rolling blackouts, very clearly, the primary cause, not the only cause, the primary cause is we have an aging fleet of power generation units. And this is what happens as you come. In some cases, these fleets are beyond, or these power stations are beyond their expected life. So you would get these kinds of things. And we need to understand that. I think the most important thing is government needs to start acting like there is a really serious emergency and take the steps as if there was a serious emergency. You can't throw bureaucratic processes at an emergency that is hitting people in the wallets day in, day out.
Certainly. Thank you so much for your insights, and we do hope it gets better. I hope one day I'll be able to interview and say, load shedding is over. How do we feel? But till that day comes, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. That is energy analyst Mohammed Madi.